It is a transfer portal edition of the Bama Online podcast on your YouTube and podcast homes for BamaOnline.com. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BOL, joined by fellow staffers Clint Lamb, Jimmy Stein. It is a Friday morning, fellows, but as we know, the transfer portal does not sleep. And in the last 24 hours, as it relates to the Alabama Crimson Tide, the news got, I would say at least, Jimmy, a little more newsier with Ja'Cory Brooks and Isaiah Hastings entering the portal. Initial thoughts just on how this week has unfolded to this date. Understanding, again, it's Friday morning. We're open for business. We're anticipating a little bit of anything and everything. But to this point, has it transpired maybe the way you thought it would in this first week?
A little bit. I think the fact that Alabama's in the college football playoff is the biggest factor here. If Alabama was not in the college football playoff and was headed to a bowl game, a New Year's Six bowl, I think there would be more. I think there would be more. I expect more. I think the pace of it has been dictated by the fact that kids aren't in a big hurry to leave a program that's about to be in the playoff. Let's be honest. A lot of kids that know they're unlikely to play in the game still would like that Rose Bowl swag bag and all the things that come with playing in the playoff. You could also be one turned ankle away from actually playing a big role in a playoff game. So I think the fact that Alabama's in the playoff is dictating the pace of which Alabama players are entering the portal. In terms of the four players who are in the portal from Alabama, I've yet to be surprised, but who knows what's to come.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm down with that swag gear. I want that windsuit. I want that college football playoff windsuit. I want the Rose Bowl swag. I want the gift suite. I want all those things. I mean, even in the NIL era, you can't undervalue those type of opportunities. And Clint, as we look at this group now, four players, as we know, former players are potentially guys that could still return to Alabama. We need to add that caveat when we talk about the transfer portal. But as it looks right now, Ja'Cory Brooks, Isaiah Hastings, Tyler Buckner, and Tyu Jones Bell, the latter two making their intentions known earlier in the week. I would guess, though, Ja'Cory Brooks, in terms of impact during his time at Alabama, Clint, hard to overlook what this guy did. Even though 2023 certainly wasn't the season a lot of us anticipated for number seven, memorable moments for Ja'Cory Brooks over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, he made some big time plays and some big time moments. And for a receiver, that's all you can really ask. Granted, were there some moments maybe in the national championship when he was a true freshman where he wasn't quite ready to assume a major role in Alabama's offense? Yes. But he's a guy who worked extremely hard, whether it be on special teams. One of the things that every time his name gets brought up, Nick Saban has talked about his impact on special teams and how much he's meant to that facet of the game. And, for a 5-star guy, we saw other receivers come in that same recruiting class who didn't take the same approach, who wanted to be, a star on the offense and all those things. And Ja'Cory Brooks was a 5-star player. He put his head down, he went to work, and he earned his way onto the field, then makes a huge play against Auburn in the Iron Bowl. Made, a couple of big catches during his freshman season, obviously led the team in targets last year, led the team in receiving touchdowns. I think he was only 2 or 3 yards behind Jermaine Burton in receiving yardage, only had one less catch. So I kind of view them as co-leading receivers because they led in different categories. But Jermaine Burton, he's still a part of that, and for one reason or another, and I think it has a lot to do with not anything necessarily that Ja'Cory Brooks did wrong. It's an injury, I think, played a factor in it, and also it's just there were other guys who are extremely talented who are ready to step up and take larger roles. And there's only one football, and you've got a lot of different playmakers, in Alabama's offense, and so somebody had to lose some reps and some targets. And unfortunately, I think part of it, like I said, is injury related. But I think that also part of it's just there was other guys ready to step up.
Yeah, after catching 39 passes for 674 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2022, you figured if this was going to be his last season at Alabama, it might have more to do with the NFL than moving on via the portal. However, after this forgettable 2023 campaign, that started with what essentially seemed to be a demotion and ended with the injury situation that you talked about, Clint. He had an injury against LSU. um, Here we are for a guy who caught touchdown passes in 4 of the last 5 games of his sophomore season. So, in departing, Ja'Cory Brooks completes the mass exodus of Alabama's 2021 wide receiver class that you alluded to as well, Clint. Think back to that season, as you said, especially down the stretch. Between those guys and the 2020 group of wide receiver signees, opportunities really for all of them to step forward with the injuries to Mechie and the injury to Jamison Williams. And really, when I think about those two groups, Trayshawn Holden, Ja'Cory Brooks, JoJo Earl, to an extent when he was healthy, they provided the most impact of those two classes. And again, as you said it, memorable moments for Ja'Cory Brooks, no doubt about it. That game tying grab against Auburn 2 seasons ago, chief among them. You also said also impactful on special teams where he showed up big on punt blocks against Texas A&M in 2021. And don't forget about the one he had against Ole Miss this season too. So it's not like it was entirely a lost season in 2023 for Ja'Cory Brooks, but still just surprising in some ways, Jimmy, that Brooks's time in the program came to a close like it did.
Yeah, it's kind of a disappointing ending, I'm sure, for Ja'Cory, but even for the fans a little bit. I mean, big play guy. There was a point, I think, during 2022 where I felt that when it was 3rd and 7 and Alabama absolutely needed to make the first down to keep the chains moving, I hope Bryce was going to find 7 because I think he did a better job of creating a little separation and catching a contested ball.
And
I
it,
think
it
was
seemed
sort of a
like Jimmy,
specialty for him.
it seemed like Bryce trusted maybe Ja'Cory Brooks more than any other guy as that season went along. No,
Good, good. It wasn't just me. That's who I trusted to catch the ball on 3rd down, and in a season when receivers weren't really stepping up. He was a good player. Hey, look, it's Nick Saban's Alabama. It's Nick. Don't be surprised if a completely healthy Ja'Cory Brooks is a really good college football player next season. No one should be surprised if that's the case. It's just not easy to get on the field and stay on the field at Nick Saban's Alabama because he's always recruiting another one. And you may be good, but there's another one coming. And you may be good, but it's hard to get in the lineup. Brooks is a good player. I think philosophically, though, sometimes that 5th star that some kids are awarded, it's heavy. It's heavy because it creates this expectation. And where I get frustrated, just as a fan of college football for these kids, is sometimes I see kids that carry the weight of that 5th star and the expectations get a little silly and a little unfair in terms of what we might expect out of some of them. And Ja'Cory Brooks was a good player. He shouldn't ever be considered anything other than a good player, regardless of that 5th star he was awarded. So I wish him well. His speech on the way out the door was written extremely well. Look, I have 7 years of higher education, and I was an English minor. I don't think I could write what Ja'Cory Brooks wrote on his way out the door. I thought that was really special too.
eloquent and classy to the finish, no
Yes.
doubt about that statement from Ja'Cory Brooks. And I don't make many NASCAR analogies here on our YouTube home, but you're right. At any position on a Nick Saban football team, you can go from sort of drafting or up top in the pecking order of the race to getting reshuffled pretty quickly. And if you do get reshuffled, it can be really hard to get back up to the top 3 or 4. And I think that's part of what happened with Ja'Cory too. And of course, the injury over the second half of the season didn't help with that. Now, if we were to go through this list of transfer portal entries from this Alabama team in terms of potential, I guess the next guy we'll talk about would qualify certainly there with Brooks. Isaiah Hastings, the second-year defensive lineman, Toronto, Canada native, who spent his senior high school season of high school football at Clearwater Academy International in Florida. Saw action in one game in his 2 seasons with the Crimson Tide, recorded a tackle in that game, a win over ULM in 2022. It's a developmental position. So the expectation is that it will take most guys time to become rotational options. And You look at Tim Keenan and some others for more on that. Still, given what we saw from true freshmen this season, like Edric Hill, Jordan Renaud, James Smith, Clint, the decision by a second year DL to move on in this era of college football, I guess, it's probably not all that shocking.
No, it's not. I kind of thought maybe he'd give it one more year, just because I thought coming out of high school that he was going to be, a little bit of a project. He was going to take a little bit longer than some other guys, but I really liked the upside. And I guarantee you there are going to be some programs around the country that like the upside, especially now that he's kind of got that been developed by Alabama for the last couple of years. But, 6'4", 290, can kind of play all along your defensive front, can play some 3-4 defensive end, can play some tackle. And, really a lot of, like I said, a lot of upside. And it's just like you said, the defensive line rotation, you typically got a lot of guys involved in that, but Alabama's recruited that position well, especially late, but then also some of the development of guys has just created this situation where there's not going to be a whole lot of opportunities in the foreseeable future. Like when you look at some of the guys who are going to be gone, Justin DeBoy, probably Tim Smith, maybe not, but I would assume so considering he's a senior. And when you look at that, just those two guys, you've got other guys who are ready to step up and assume larger roles. James Smith, Jordan Renaud, you mentioned him, who've shown some promise. And so just, a guy like Isaiah Hastings, he's probably wondering where he stands as far as the pecking order and would he have an opportunity to climb and move up. But I do think this wasn't really a situation where he was a disappointment. I think it was he was going to be more of a long-term developmental defensive lineman. And, when you give it 2 years, understandably so, that's not me taking a shot at him, but when it's only been 2 years, that development hasn't quite happened to the degree that it needs to.
And you're a guy that's probably also anticipating the potential for incoming portal guys, perhaps at your position along that defensive front, as we've heard rumblings about here in the last couple of days. And look, Jimmy, even with limited playing time at Alabama, as Clint alluded to early on there in talking about Isaiah, seeing Hastings self-report offers from ACC and Big Ten programs in the immediate aftermath of his entry to the portal, I guess that only speaks to not only his potential, but again, the value of that position that he plays.
Absolutely. Defensive line is kind of the gold of recruiting and roster management. It's just hard to find big people with that level of athleticism that's required. But what's disappointing to me, it's the system as a whole. It's not Hastings, it's the system, and it's a developmental sport, and that's a developmental position. Very few just show up ready-made SEC defensive linemen. You're talking about the freaks of the freaks that are able to do that. It's a developmental spot. And what's a little unfortunate in terms of how the system has been created now in college football is you sign a developmental prospect like Isaiah Hastings, like Clint said, that's going to take a while. It's going to take a minute for him to learn the spot and the strength and conditioning and to know all he needs to know. And then Alabama does all the hard work, and someone else is going to be the beneficiary of all the work Alabama did to recruit him, to develop him, to get him ready to play. Now he's going to show up somewhere else. Close to ready to play, maybe not quite ready, but close to ready, and someone else will reap the benefits of that. It's kind of unfair that that's the system for schools this day, but it is what it is. Look, you can't blame the kid; he wants to play. Who wouldn't want to play, especially when you're 20 years old and you put in all the work? So there's no bad guy here at all. It's just the system. It is what it is, and you just wish him well. I would just urge for Isaiah to pick his next place smartly. Pick it smartly. If you're going someplace because you're upset with not getting on the field, then go somewhere you're going to get on the field. Don't sign with Ohio State. I mean, I'm just being brutally honest. Don't sign with Ohio State. Don't sign with Michigan. If you're going somewhere to play, pick a place where you will play. And that's my agent advice for Isaiah today.
We always like to have that available to us here on the program from Jimmy Stein. Also, earlier in the week, guys, we heard from Tyler Buckner, the one-time Notre Dame quarterback transfers to Alabama for the 2023 season, headed back to Notre Dame now as a lacrosse player. How about that? Tyler Buckner, a national recruit in both football and lacrosse coming out of high school. He spent the 2021 and 2022 seasons, of course, in South Bend before reuniting with former Irish offensive coordinator Tommy Rees in Tuscaloosa. He got the start this season against USF following the loss to Texas. 5 of 14 for 34 yards in that game in Tampa. He also rushed twice for 11 yards. And it seemed like, Jimmy, after he missed Jermaine Burton on that post route in the second quarter of that USF game, that was pretty much the last we saw of Tyler Buckner behind center for the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, it just didn't work out great for him. I hate it that I hope he's not leaving with, gosh, my time at Alabama was a total disaster. I wish that had never happened. I hope that's not the memory. I hope he's got some good memories of practicing with the team and is somehow able to erase what happened in Tampa. Because I would prefer, even though we didn't do it here, I would prefer to remember Tyler Buckner as the MVP of the Gator Bowl. I mean, he beat an SEC team in the Gator Bowl when he was at Notre Dame. He won the starting job at Notre Dame not once but twice. Had an injury situation that kept him out of a lot of starts there. I wish the best for him. I'm glad that Alabama offered him an opportunity, and he said yes. That's what I'm grateful for as an Alabama guy. That he said yes when Alabama said, "Hey, we need you," and he said okay, and he gave it a shot. So I hope things work out for him. It was obviously not working here. Who would have guessed the Jalen Milroe when he arrived and the Jalen Milroe that he's leaving almost feel like two entirely separate people, right? He shows up because we're not sure who the quarterback's going to be. And then he's leaving with Alabama's starting quarterback in the Heisman picture, especially for 2024. So that's pretty amazing. But hey, good luck with the lacrosse thing. And hey, this is what I'll do for Buckner. Next year, if I hear that lacrosse is going to be on one of the ESPNs and Notre Dame is playing, I'll flip it on. I'll flip it on and pull for you, kid.
Yeah, watch some Tyler Buckner on the lacrosse field maybe in 2024. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could say without Tyler Buckner, who knows if we would have got the definitive commitment to Jalen Milroe. Maybe it took Tyler Buckner to get this Alabama staff to that point. That's probably not a perspective they would rather view it from, but it seemed to require that process before the definitive decision was made to roll with Jalen Milroe. Um, when you think about the quarterback position too, Clint, and the potential, I guess, for more attrition at that spot because Milroe should be entrenched right now. I don't think there's any seams about it. Julian Sayin set to join this mix in a few weeks. So even with Buckner moving on, you're still talking about potentially 5 scholarship quarterbacks as the calendar turns to 2024. Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, Dylan Lonergan, Eli Holstein, and now Julian Sayin.
Yeah, and that's I think fans have. I hope they haven't got a false sense of what the quarterback position is supposed to be in a transfer portal era because you're not going to be rolling with 5 quarterbacks most years. I mean, it's just that's the bottom line. I would say 3 is probably a pretty safe assumption. Maybe sometimes you can squeeze in 4, and that's great if you can. I'm sure Alabama would like to have 4, but there's a lot of guys that want to play. And, I thought it was a rare situation that they were able to get 5. And I'll give Tyler Buckner, some slack because he didn't arrive until late. And he was trying to compete for a job that other guys have been competing for months, had been building, chemistry with the pass catchers and, chemistry in the locker room with all the different players. And, he was able to climb up to the number 2 job. I think the writing was pretty much on the wall when he goes from number 2 to number 1 for a brief period. And the next thing you know, he's the number 4 quarterback. And they're playing a road game against Mississippi State, and they have 3 centers. And Tyler Buckner has a trainer or somebody, snapping him the football or going through, in pregame warm ups. He didn't even have anybody to snap it to him. And so you knew I mean, he's dropped all the way to number 4 at the very least, and that probably is going to end his time as far as playing at Alabama. But he gave it all, his all. It was a tough situation for him to be in. I'm sure it was a kind of I wouldn't say a culture shock, but I'm sure Alabama compared to Notre Dame was a little bit different. The familiarity with Tommy Rees certainly, I'm sure, made that a little bit easier. But when you look at this quarterback position with Julian Sayin coming in, you got a returning starter and Jalen Milroe, who's continued to grow and do a lot of good things. You still really like what you got in Dylan Lonergan, probably. And of course, Ty Simpson's made a lot of growth. I don't know what his future holds, but I know that I mean, I'm sure if I had to guess, the coaching staff would love to keep him because he's made some good progress, at least from what I've been able to see in the limited time against Kentucky and UT Chattanooga. We'll see what ends up happening with it. But Alabama's quarterback spot going into this offseason, at the very least, you're going to feel a lot better about it than you probably did going into last offseason.
You will. And Jimmy, we know the dynamic entirely different. We anticipate going into 2024. As Clint said, you just aren't going to keep 5 scholarship quarterbacks most season. I think Alabama was able to do that because it truly was an open competition going into August of this year. And even going into September of this year, that had the feel of that. It's not going to have that same feel, you would think, going into 2024, given what we've seen from Jalen Milroe.
Yeah, I'm not going to predict who's leaving. I'm not going to predict that because that's not fair at all. And I don't want, just speaking personally, I don't want any of them to leave. But I will be shocked if all 5 guys are still with the team next August. I'll be very surprised because that's not what I see in college football in 2024 anywhere else. That anywhere else has not just 5, but 5 that they like. I mean, and I think that's the way that Alabama staff looks at these guys. Ty Simpson, to me, looked ready. Now, he's not a threat to take Jalen Milroe's job. No one is. Jalen Milroe is going to be one of the best starting quarterbacks in college football in 2024. But I thought Ty Simpson looked ready down the stretch. The kid that I saw at Kentucky, I'm like, that he's ready to play. Maybe he wasn't in Tampa, but now he is. He's ready to play. I think Dylan Lonergan, we've all heard the whispers. I think we all know that the staff is very high on Dylan Lonergan's future. Eli Holstein is the same kid that they recruited, big, strong, big arm, surprisingly athletic. And of course, Julian Sayin, the number 1 quarterback in the country in the 2024 class. So they like all these guys. I'm sure they would like them to stay. I know I would like them to stay, but it's just very unrealistic that that basically about 9 months from right now that we're going to be discussing all 5 of these guys in fall camp in 2024 at Alabama. That just doesn't seem realistic to me.
I guess what's happened this week too is got me head on a swivel when it comes to quarterbacks, first team, second team, third team, because I just saw 2 elite programs lose starting quarterbacks to the transfer portal. Now, maybe those teams, I can't imagine Oklahoma being just totally okay with Dylan Gabriel moving on. McCord at Ohio State, I don't know. But boy, it is wild times, not just in the transfer portal era, but especially with the quarterback position. And absolutely a good situation. Dylan Lonergan may be freed up to play baseball. That may be a great situation for Alabama baseball coming up this spring. We'll see how that plays out too coming up in the ensuing months. So, guys, I guess all this to say that if I had some advice for our viewers and our subscribers there at BamaOnLine.com, you're going to hear more rumblings about potential transfers and Alabama's interest in those moving on from other programs. And we've got a couple of expert driven threads up on the roundtable at BamaOnline.com right now that will be updating continuously throughout the process. In fact, site publisher Tim Watts recently had a portal nugget for our subscribers there on the roundtable. So keep it locked there for what could be an eventful month or so. I mean, guys, just in the last few days, guys like Chris Paul Jr., the linebacker from Arkansas, a couple of standouts from Florida, and perhaps the entire defensive line from Texas A&M have been linked to UA in some form or fashion. So, well, we'll see what happens. Jimmy, what advice would you have for our viewers and subscribers at this point?
This is extremely difficult to do. Maybe it's my superpower that I'm able to do this, and I hope I can share it with everyone else. But this is what you have to learn to do: believe everything and believe nothing at the same time. So everything you read, believe it, but don't believe anything. And that's really the because it everything that turns out true started as a rumor, right? But is every rumor true? Not even close.
Clint,
So
Clint, it's Clint. It's kind of like quarterback play. You get your pre-snap look. Okay, what am I seeing? But then when the ball snapped, everything changes. You got to be able to process, Clint. You got to be able to process the information as it unfolds. Right? It's fluid. Fluid's a great word in all this, I think.
Remain calm. The Aaron Rodgers, take the Aaron Rodgers route and remain calm, because in years past, I mean, even last year, guys are entering the portal. Fans are freaking out. Why is this guy entering? Why is this guy leaving? And it's like 98% of in those situations, Nick Saban or Alabama, it was as much their side making that decision as it was the other side. And sometimes it's not a disrespect thing. Sometimes it's just a better, hey, we're looking at this down the road. We're changing this as far as what we like to do. It could be an attitude issue. It could be a number of reasons. But the point is, don't freak out if someone enters that you think shouldn't be entering. If Alabama wants them back and is very intent on getting them back, you'll hear rumblings of that probably. If you don't hear much on it, I think that can sometimes be rather telling as well. And so just understand. And I hope that through last year and all the freaking out that happened, Javion Cohen enters the portal. He's a multi-year starting guard. He's leaving. Everybody's freaking out. How do you think Alabama's looked at left guard this season with Tyler Booker? So, hopefully through this process and the way Alabama has looked and grown this season, fans will more so understand that there's a method behind the madness.
Yeah, Jimmy, this isn't a program like Ole Miss. And kudos to Lane Kiffin because they basically come up with a new team, it seems like, at a lot of critical spots every year. Won 10 games this year. So this isn't to knock that approach. It's just that some programs have to take that way to get to where they want to get to. I guess the luxury still for Nick Saban in Alabama is that you can cherry pick. So while you may hear tens of names associated with Alabama, I think Clint's point too is when it comes right down to it, that total number probably not going to be much more than 4, 5, or 6, as we've seen the last few years.
history is your guide. I mean, history is the best method to predict the future is to look at the history. And the history says Alabama supplements. They sign the majority of their new talent through high school recruiting, and then they supplement through the portal. Might be two guys, might be three guys, might be a maximum of 5 or 6. Seems to be sort of the max of Coach Saban's comfort level. Makes perfect sense. Look, Alabama's not South Alabama. I mean, I had a Sun Belt coach tell me one time about recruiting in the portal. He told me, look, I'm honest. I can't go into a high school and convince a kid not to sign with the SEC. A kid with SEC talent, he's not going to sign with me. He's going to go to the SEC. But you know where I can get SEC talent? Out of the portal. A kid that's in the portal from an SEC school that was frustrated because he couldn't play. Now I can go get kids like that where I couldn't get them before. Well, Alabama's not in that position at all. Alabama's in a position of, hey, we can sign whoever we want out of the high schools generally, and we get the talent we want and develop them in the way we want them developed. But things happen. You end up with you need a band-aid here and there. You need a plug-in starter at this spot or this spot. But I think the way Alabama and Nick Saban handles it is perfect for Alabama. But every school has a completely different situation, and every school has to adjust based on what their needs are. And I get Lane Kiffin building Ole Miss through the portal or primarily through the portal. I get it, but that's nothing that Alabama has to do. And it's nothing that Georgia's doing. It's nothing that Ohio State's doing. All the programs that are like Alabama tend to be recruiting similarly to Alabama in terms of the portal and high school recruiting.
Yeah, Clint, there's want and there's need, right? Like, man, when I see Trevor Etienne hit the portal, that dude can go now. I think of Jameer Gibbs when I think of Trevor Etienne. I know some people talk about Rocket Sanders of Arkansas, and nice back, don't get me wrong. But if you're going to ask me if I had a choice anywhere, those two guys, boy, thinking about Trevor Etienne, it's a thought. But again, we know Alabama has promising young players at the running back position, so that's probably more of a want. But I think about inside linebacker and Deontay Lawson with the injury history and anticipating, I guess, Trez Marshall, I guess, maybe moving on. You get Jahad Campbell coming back, but seems like there's some uncertainty depth wise. So a guy like Chris Paul Jr. of Arkansas, when I hear a name like that at a position like that, it tends to capture my attention a little bit more. What about you?
Yeah, it's so interesting. They got 4 commitments currently, if I'm not mistaken, with off-ball linebackers. And when you look at actual departures, now granted there could be some through the transfer portal. In fact, I would probably assume that there will be. But that's I think there's a reason for that, right? I mean, when you have that many coming in, which those are you can now view some of these high school guys as more developmental. You can develop them into the Deontay Lawsons. He didn't step on campus from day one and was the guy that we see today. Jahad Campbell last year didn't play a whole lot. He's now a big time part of Alabama's, I would say, linebacker rotation, but really he's technically a starter. And doing a lot of really good things. And so some of those young guys at the linebacker position, sometimes that takes a while, and you might want to complement that a little bit with a veteran presence. But I do find it interesting, the entire transfer portal side of things, the way Alabama's approached it. Do you this is a question that I have for both of you, as far as the way that they were approaching it previously. It felt like it was bigger name guys that they were familiar with, that they recruited at one point. Henry To'o. You go back to like Landon Dickerson, but Jameson Williams, he was brought in at a position of need and to fill a certain void. He ended up being a superstar, I think, and I don't even think Alabama was expecting him to be that caliber of player. But Jameer Gibbs felt more like a luxury, where it's like a player of that caliber enters the portal, not necessarily a huge need, but it's like they're going to go. I mean, they're going to go after certain guys who maybe have that superstar potential, even though they feel good about the guys they already have in the room. But through the Key and Amos additions and the impact that they've had, now granted, I could be wrong. Key's a UAB guy, so he's in state. Maybe Nick Saban was pretty familiar with him. Was able to watch the LSU game. Obviously, Jalen Key had a big performance there. But Amos, maybe the familiarity with Billy Napier played a part. The fact that Louisiana was pretty good under Napier and he watched him a little bit then. But it feels like the familiarity with those two players, it felt more of, okay, there aren't a whole lot of guys out there who we feel like we can trust, that we are familiar with, but we really need to address when Jacquez Robinson and Traquan Fagans both entered the transfer portal. It felt like there was a need to fill some depth spots, but both have made a major impact. I just wonder, do you think that was the step that was needed to make Alabama kind of get out of its comfort zone a little bit more often moving forward?
Yeah, it does feel like here's a perfect example to me. Now, of course, we don't know who the staff knows. We don't know that. But there's 2 names associated with Alabama right now that we've talked about on the round table, and Tim Watts and has talked about this. LT Overton. Here's a guy Alabama knows. They know him. This feels like what Alabama has done in the past, right? They know this guy. So there's probably some level of comfort with, hey, we recruited him, we wanted him, we liked him. We know him. We're comfortable with him. So even though we feel pretty good about defensive line, because you got Keenan, you got Otis, you got Damon Payne coming back, you got Jamarian Latham coming back, you got James Smith developing maybe into a star. So we feel okay with this spot, but we like this guy. We know this guy. So we're going to bring him in. On the other hand, Chris Paul, I don't recall Alabama recruiting him, or at least him being a high priority for Alabama as a high school recruit. He's a guy that apparently has caught their eye, probably in preparation for playing Arkansas and just being familiar with the SEC West. You have a need at inside linebacker, possibly with Trez moving on. Deontay's been injured. Maybe Deontay's moving on. We don't know that as we record this. Maybe you have a need, and it's not so much, hey, what inside linebacker do we know? It's hey, this guy's really good and he's a fit with what it is that we need. So I'm with Clint. I see it as a mixture of, hey, sometimes we know this guy and we're really comfortable with him. And then sometimes it's like, hey, when we have a need, being comfortable with someone's out the door. We just sort of need a dude, and this guy looks to be a good fit physically with what it is that we're looking for.
Well, with Paul and Overton, you're also talking about two guys Alabama has coached against the last few years. So there's that familiarity too. And with all these analysts now and how they break things down to the most granular aspect of things, you could have some analysts saying, look, this guy, I know he's at A&M, but he'd be a great fit for us. And when I look at LT Overton, I think measurable 6'5, 265. We talked about Damon Payne. We talked about Tim Keenan, Jaheim Otis. You've got those kind of guys, right? You got the 6'3, 6'4, 320 types. Justin Aboigbe's more of the Overton type, a DL, more of an end that you can move inside. So, that could make some sense. You're losing Justin Aboigbe. You got Jordan Renaud coming along who could be that type of guy as well. But Overton may already be there. I think a lot of times they're viewing guys too as bridge guys. Jalen Key, can he get us to that next round of safeties? Same thing with Trey Amos. Go ahead and get him in the system because he's a multi-year guy. That was the great thing about Trey Amos. He not only came up big for you in a huge spot last Saturday, but you should have him for another year in case Terry and Arnold and Kool-Aid move on to the National Football League. I think Tyler Buckner was initially viewed as potentially a bridge guy to whoever you thought might be the guy if it wasn't Jalen Milrose. So, yeah, there's so many things that come into play, and intangibles a big part of it too. I think, unfortunately, having some background with folks that are in this stuff on the programs on the football side of things at other places, not Alabama. So many of these guys, they don't even know their academic status when they hit the portal, and that's tough because some of these guys they don't come from programs where the academic support staff is what it is at Alabama and some other places. That's another benefit for these guys at Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State. The academic support almost ensures they're going to be fine to move on to their next stop. You got guys coming from, group of fives or low D1s or FCS. They may not even know when they hit the portal. They just jump in there and boy, you see some casualties as a result,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
and that's kind of I think that was the biggest part in the initial stages of the portal for Alabama was if we recruit a guy that we've recruited and are familiar with, we know his personality. We know if he would fit with us as far as, because you've gone through that process, you've got to know his family, and just all those different, you're familiar with them. I mean, and I think that was a huge part early, but as you've learned how to navigate the transfer portal more and look into guys' backgrounds, it almost becomes more NFL draft related, right? I mean, when someone's getting drafted, they turn over every stone on a guy's personality, family background, history, and all those things to make sure they're getting the right guy fit for their organization. I don't think it's quite to that degree, but I think it's a lot more towards that than people realize. And you bring in some guys, and sometimes they're not a fit in their mindset or the way they've been coached, and they've got some bad
Culture.
habits. And I think that was probably, I wouldn't say it was a culture issue with Eli Ricks, but he had so much success at LSU doing it his way. So why would he come to Alabama and do it Alabama's way? His way had gotten him to be really good. So there's like a high school recruit. He comes in and he hadn't established himself on that level yet. So it's a lot more moldable compared to a guy like Eli Ricks, who it's like, I mean, you got to do these little things right or you're not going to be effective. And it's like, well, I was effective over there and I didn't do these things. So why do I got to do them here? And I'm not saying like that he had a bad attitude or anything like that, but I am saying it's tougher. But there was familiarity there from recruiting him coming out of high school when they knew that he had the personality where they could reach him and, motivate him and do all those things they needed to do. And so that plays a part in it as well. But that's just the transfer portal is really interesting. And I think every year that it's been a thing, coaches are learning how to navigate it more. And I think that they're, for Alabama, it's so much fit, whether it be schematically or whether it be culturally. And that's, I think, you don't want to bring in somebody that's a superstar, but they don't have the right attitude or, they're not going to fit into your locker room or they're going to be a diva or something like that. So Alabama's got talent all over the place. They don't have to have those kind of players. And, I think that plays a role. So sometimes if they're going after somebody, they feel comfortable with them and they've at least done their homework enough where they feel confident in their ability to come in. And I will say, I think Trey Amos and Jalen Key in particular are going to go down as two very important guys, and CJ Dupree as well. I think you probably throw him in there too, just from being guys that kind of changed the approach of Alabama in the transfer portal. The fact that you bring all three of those guys in and they were all success stories, I think is pretty big.
Yeah, and as we get out of here, Jimmy, we need to note that Coleman Hutzler has been made official as the new defensive coordinator at Mississippi State. Spent the last couple of years at Alabama coaching outside linebackers and special teams. I'd say both those areas improved over a year ago. And I say that knowing that Will Anderson played one of those outside linebacker positions in 2022. But that group as a whole this year has been really a positive, and the kicking game has improved. So, congrats to Coleman Hutzler, who's going to take over that state defense under new head coach Jeff Lebby. What about that, Jimmy?
Well, he, again, his guys were very productive this season. The outside guys. I mean, Turner and Braswell probably the best duo in college football in terms of applying consistent pressure from the edge. They're probably the best duo out there, in part due to Coleman Hutzler's coaching, and in part due to DNA. I mean, these guys were pretty good. They were going to be hard to mess up, But he did do a good job getting production out of his guys this particular season. And he obviously has a really good relationship with Jeff Lebby. They were both on staff together at Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin, and this is Lebby's choice. And hey, it's an opportunity. Nick Saban's the best there's ever been at upgrading. He loses a staff member and upgrades. It would not surprise me at all for Nick Saban to just simply bring in another outstanding coach. The edge spot, you want a good recruiter there because you've got to be good rushing the passer, right? So that guy's not only got to be good coaching his guys, he's got to be someone that the 5 stars want to play for. So look for Nick Saban to work his magic again in the hiring portal.
Yeah, the hiring portal. Clint, how about that ringing endorsement from Jimmy Stein? Hey, State fans, he won't mess your defense up.
Hey, I will give.
I didn't promise that.
I will give Hutzler credit. You seen last year, it kind of felt like the outside linebacker group was somewhat of a disappointment. I think Will Anderson was so interesting because everybody knew he was like number 1 pick status or top 3 or top 5 at the very least. And it's like you don't want to get that player injured. You want to protect him as much as possible. That becomes a difficult situation. Dallas Turner was in a lot more prove it mode this year. He was very highly thought of, but he was not this top 5 lock that Will Anderson was. So it was a different approach. But what I'll give Hutzler credit for is the special teams has seemingly improved, but also there has been development from a pass rushing perspective. Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell both. I still think Braswell needs to develop a couple of more counter moves to help with the arsenal. But as far as Dallas Turner, he was a raw ball of clay the last couple of years, just freaky traits. And I don't think he's a finished product by any means, but I think today he is a much more technically sound outside linebacker than he was even a year ago. The same can be said for Chris Braswell. You love his improvement and how comfortable he is now dropping into coverage. He's not Dallas Turner on that front, but he's close. I will say that just putting weight on him, getting him to learn how to set the edge better across the board, run stopping, pass rushing, dropping into coverage. They're much better players today, and some of that is DNA. I 100% agree. But we also have seen a lot of Alabama high-quality defenders come out, and maybe they weren't a technically refined finished product. And I think that those two guys are a lot closer to that today than they were a year ago.
Well, we're not a finished product here on this show either, but we're about finished for today. Got to get that outside linebacker special teams hot board going, guys. They're at the round table.
Jimmy's available.
BamaOnLine.com.
Very
names. Sal Sunseri, Lance. Throw them up there.
You are going to hear those names a bunch, right?
Yeah.
That's all. It's the
Circle
names
back.
you know. That's what fans love, the name they know.
Absolutely.
Hey, it worked with Kevin Steele. Keep it going, man. Bring them all back.
Yeah. Old dogs. Love it. Hey, good stuff as always, guys. Appreciate you taking the time. And of course, we appreciate the viewers and subscribers out there. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, we certainly hope you'll hit that button right now. Turn on those notifications. You'll get all of our video content as it drops right here on the YouTube home for BamaOnLine.com. And of course, you want to be right there with us at BOL, the Roundtable, our premium message board. That's where you're going to learn everything first as we get it anyway. There's where you're going to get it first. The Roundtable at BOL. For Clint Lamb, Jimmy Stein, Travis Reier, thanks again. Until next time.